Every night someone dragged furniture across the floor of the apartment above mine. Heavy scraping back and forth for hours. The problem is I lived on the top floor. There was no apartment above mine. There was only the roof, and something up there was rearranging furniture that didn't exist in a room that wasn't there. Welcome back. It's just you and me in the dark tonight. 3 true stories about the apartment upstairs and the neighbors we never see, the footsteps over our heads, the life we imagine going on above the ceiling, and what happens when we finally learn who's really up there. Let's begin. I moved into the top floor apartment of an old building. 3rd floor, the highest one, nothing above me but the roof. I like being on top. No footsteps overhead, no one stomping around above my bedroom at night. That was the whole appeal, which is why it made no sense the first night when I heard the dragging. It started around midnight. A sound from directly above me, the unmistakable scrape of heavy furniture being dragged across a wooden floor. A long, slow scrape, then a thud, then another. Someone up there was moving furniture around, pushing something heavy across the room back and forth, and I lay in bed confused because there was no up there. I was on the top floor. Above my ceiling was the attic crawl space and then the roof. There was no apartment up there. There was no floor to drag furniture across. And yet the sound was clear and close and directly overhead, the heavy grinding scrape of furniture being rearranged for hours right above my bed. I told myself it was the building settling, pipes, the wind moving something on the roof. But it happened every night, always starting around midnight, always the same. The slow drag, the heavy scrape, the thud, back and forth across a floor that couldn't be there. And it wasn't random. It had a rhythm to it, a purpose, the way it sounds when someone is actually arranging a room, pushing the couch here, the table there, trying it one way, then another. Someone above me was decorating an apartment that did not exist. I asked the landlord about it. I asked if there was any space up there, any unit, any storage room. He told me no. Top floor was the top floor. Above me was just the roof structure, unfinished, no floor, no room, nothing anyone could walk on, let alone furnish. And he got a little cagey when I pressed him, the way landlords do when you've asked the wrong question. He said the previous tenant had complained about the same thing, and the one before that. He said it always stopped eventually once people got used to it, once they stopped listening for it. But I couldn't stop listening for it. Every night, the dragging. And it started to change. Because over the weeks, the sounds moved. They started directly over my bedroom, but night by night they migrated. Over the living room, over the hall, over the kitchen, as if the apartment above me, the one that couldn't exist, was slowly being rearranged to match the layout of mine, as if someone up there was moving their furniture to sit directly over my furniture, their bed over my bed, their chair over my chair, building above my ceiling, in a room with no floor, a perfect mirror of the home I was living in. I started near the end to talk back to it. I'd lie in bed and listen to the dragging move into position over my head, settling the last piece of furniture directly above my bed, and some nights I'd say out loud to my own ceiling, "What do you want?" And of course nothing ever answered. It was just the scraping, the endless patient rearranging. But one night, after I asked, the dragging stopped completely. For the first time in weeks, silence directly overhead. And I lay there in that silence more frightened than I'd ever been by the noise. Because the noise at least meant it was busy, occupied up there, arranging its impossible room. The silence meant it had stopped to listen, that it had heard me ask. And after a long, long moment from directly above my bed, in the room that could not exist, on the floor that was not there, something lay down. I heard it, the long, settling creak of a body easing onto floorboards directly over me, matching my position exactly, lying down where I was lying down. It had finished arranging the room to mirror mine, and now it was going to bed, in its bed, above my bed, the way you finally settle in on the first night, in a home you've waited a very long time to move back into. I moved out before they finished, and I never learned what was up there, dragging furniture across nothing, night after night, slowly copying the shape of my life above my head. But the landlord said one thing, the day I left, that I've never shaken. I asked him finally, straight out, "What's up there?" And he didn't say a ghost or a noise or nothing. He looked up at the ceiling and he said quietly, "Whoever's up there was here before the building was. We just built the roof over it. It's been trying to move back in ever since." And then he handed me my deposit and wished me luck, and I did not ask him a single thing more. That landlord's answer explained nothing and everything at once. The next woman never got an answer from her landlord at all, just handprints spreading across her own ceiling from an apartment upstairs that had been empty for months. She lived in a ground-floor apartment, and the unit above her had been vacant for months. She knew, because she'd watched the last tenants move out, and no one had moved in since. The apartment above her was empty, so she was surprised one day to see a water stain appearing on her living room ceiling, a dark, spreading, damp patch, the way you get when there's a leak from above. She figured a pipe had burst in the empty unit upstairs, and she called the landlord to report it. But the stain kept spreading, and as it spread, it took a shape. And the shape it took, over a few days, bleeding through her ceiling, was a handprint. A large, splayed handprint in water stain, pressed flat against the ceiling from above, as if someone in the empty apartment upstairs had pressed a wet hand down against their floor, hard, and it had soaked through and printed itself on her ceiling. One handprint. Then, over the next days, another beside it, and another. Handprints spreading across her living room ceiling in water stain, all of them pressing down from the empty apartment above. The landlord went up to check the vacant unit. He found no burst pipe, no leak, no water source at all. The apartment above her was dry and empty and locked, and there was nothing up there that could have soaked through her ceiling. But the handprints kept coming, and they weren't just spreading now. They were moving, traveling across her ceiling, handprint by handprint in a line, the way you would move if you were crawling across the floor of the empty apartment above, on your hands, pressing down as you went, printing your path onto her ceiling from above, crawling toward one corner of her living room, the corner above her bedroom door. The landlord, to his credit, took it seriously. He was as unnerved as she was by the handprints, and he had people up in the empty unit tearing into the ceiling and the floor, hunting for the leak, the source, any ordinary answer at all. They found nothing. No water, no pipe, no stain on the floor of the upstairs apartment. The handprints existed only on her ceiling, on the underside, printing through from a floor that was bone dry above, which is impossible. Water doesn't soak up through a dry floor to stain the ceiling below it. But there they were. And the workers, she said, got quiet and quick and did not want to be in that empty apartment after the first day. One of them told her on his way out not to sleep in her bedroom anymore. He wouldn't say why. He just said he had been in a lot of empty apartments in his life, and that one didn't feel empty, and that whatever was leaving those prints was doing it on purpose, was aiming for something, and she should be somewhere else when it got where it was going. She thought he was being dramatic. Then the handprints reached the ceiling over her bed, and she understood he'd simply been the only one honest enough to say out loud what the marks had been spelling out, slowly, for weeks. I am coming to you. I know exactly where you sleep. She started sleeping at a friend's, and the last time she went back to gather her things, she looked up at her bedroom ceiling, and the handprints had made it. They'd crawled all the way across the empty apartment above and down, somehow impossibly, onto her bedroom ceiling, and they stopped directly over her bed. A cluster of them pressing down right above where her head would lie on the pillow, as if whatever was up there, crawling through the empty apartment, pressing its wet hands against the floor, had been making its way patiently over weeks to the one spot on the ceiling that was directly above her sleeping face, and had finally arrived. Handprints fade eventually, but at least they leave a mark you can point to. The last story tonight leaves no mark at all, just a conversation in a stairwell with a neighbor who couldn't possibly have been standing there. She lived in an apartment building and, like most people, barely knew her neighbors. But there was one man from the upstairs unit she'd pass now and then in the stairwell. An older gentleman, polite, a little pale, a little tired-looking, who always gave her a small nod and a quiet hello. They never spoke much, just neighborly nods on the stairs over the course of a few months. She thought nothing of it. A quiet, older man who lived upstairs. One evening she passed him on the stairs, and this time he stopped and he spoke to her. He seemed troubled. He said softly that he was sorry for any noise, that he didn't mean to disturb her, that he found it hard to rest and sometimes moved around at night. She told him it was fine, she hadn't been bothered. He nodded sadly and thanked her, and said the strangest thing. He said, "It's good to be seen. Nobody sees me much anymore." And he went on up the stairs. She thought it was a lonely old man's remark, and it stayed with her, made her sad. And the next day she mentioned it to the landlord. Said she'd been chatting with the older gentleman from the upstairs unit, and maybe someone should check on him. He seemed lonely and unwell. And the landlord looked at her strangely and asked her to describe the man. So she did. And the landlord's face changed. He told her that the man she was describing had indeed lived in the upstairs unit for many years. A quiet, older man, pale, tired, kept to himself, but that he had died in that apartment, alone, over a year ago, and that the unit had been empty ever since. No new tenant, the family still sorting the estate. There was no one living upstairs. There had been no one living upstairs for more than a year. And the man she'd been nodding to on the stairs for months, the man who'd stopped to apologize for the noise, the man who'd said it was good to be seen, had been dead the entire time. She moved out, but she told me she doesn't regret the conversation because she keeps thinking about what he said. It's good to be seen. Nobody sees me much anymore. And she thinks that for months, without knowing it, she'd been the only one who could, the only one who nodded back, who said hello, who treated him like he was still there. And she wonders sometimes if that was a kindness or a mistake, whether by seeing him she'd given a lonely dead man a little peace, or whether she'd simply let him know that there was still someone in the building who could, and that he'd never have to be quite so unseen again. She went into the man's apartment after the empty one, the one the landlord let her see, because she needed to understand. And it was exactly as he'd left it. The estate had never been settled. His furniture was still there, his books, his coat on the hook, a fine layer of dust over all of it. A year of stillness. And on the little table beside his reading chair, angled toward the window, there was a pair of reading glasses and a book left open, face down, holding his place, as if he'd only just set it down, as if he'd only stepped out for a moment. And she stood in that quiet, dusty, waiting apartment and understood the whole shape of it. He hadn't gone anywhere. Death hadn't moved him out. He had simply kept on living the small, quiet, lonely life he'd always lived, reading in his chair, moving around at night when he couldn't sleep, nodding to the one neighbor kind enough to nod back. And she thinks that's the real horror of it, and the real sadness tangled together, that a person can be so unseen, so alone, that even dying doesn't interrupt their routine, that no one notices enough to let them stop. That's all for tonight. If this one's got you listening for footsteps over your head, then you know what to do. Subscribe and hit that bell, because there's a new true horror story here every single night, and you won't want to miss one. Give it a like so it finds the next person in the dark, and share it with someone who's got noisy neighbors upstairs. I'll be right here tomorrow night, when the lights go down. Sleep well, if you can.
Like, share, and subscribe for daily horror stories every single day.